So good evening from Cape Town, South Africa, and hello to everybody who's joining from everywhere else in the world. I bring you greetings from the WCC, from the Just Community of Women and Men, from the WCC Food for Life campaign, and from just the Ecumenical Center at large. Okay, so today our event is on overcoming the barriers for women to food, water, land, and livelihoods, the role of faith, communities, institutions in women's empowerment. Okay, so this is a UNCSW 68 parallel event, and welcome to all of you who are joining from New York. We know that you've had a busy week, so thank you for joining. And the focus theme for the CSW 68 this year is accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. Welcome to all of our speakers. I'm going to introduce them briefly, and then just before they speak, I will ask Reverend Nicole Ashwood from the Just Community of Women and Men to do some opening remarks and prayer.
Thank you so very much, Katlego. Friends, colleagues, partners, delegates, good morning, afternoon to you all. I'm just actually coming from a parallel event over at the Salvation Army Auditorium, where a young lady from Latin America shared that as a child, she thought that challenges getting water and therefore finding access to food and agriculture was a climate change problem. As she moved into teenager years, she discovered that it wasn't a climate change issue, as it was that her community had been overlooked by the government in their provision of resources, partly because they were indigenous peoples, but also simply because they, as she saw it, were women. Issue of agriculture and access to land, access to resources to work on the land is one that is extremely troubling in this time. Records suggest that 80% of women are working in agrarian sectors, yet only 20% own the land on which they work. That, friends, constitutes a challenge in our book. And as a Just Community of Women and Men, we are partnering with our colleagues at the World Council of Churches and with global partners from India, South Africa, and here in New York to say, how can we create a different kind of reality? So we bid you welcome. And as we do in most of the World Council of Churches events, I invite you to pause for a moment as we go to God in prayer. Loving God, the issue of violence against women is not just physical. It relates to every aspect of life where women are marginalized, dismembered, unremembered, and seek to have agency in their world. We ask, therefore, is that we have this conversation about access, particularly in relation to water and food, that you would guide the proceedings, and that at the end of this gathering, we would be able to say, we are finding solutions and we are seeking justice for a different kind of world. So guide us, oh God. And may we, as we gather every Thursday, every day, every week, every 26th, every year, discover that not only does justice begin with us, but that we constitute those who offer an alternate way of being. This is our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Reverend Nikki. So I will now introduce the first speaker, and we will now hear from the speakers based on their context, some of the realities that they contend with. Okay. So the first speaker is Esther Sakaria. Esther works as a facilitator of ONIPA Infot, which is a project under LUXA and ECLIN Eastern Diocese. She teaches life skills and computer skills to parish pastors, parish secretaries, and youth. Esther will be speaking to us about issues in food security and access to land's rights. Esther?
Thank you, and good afternoon from Namibia. Thank you. I'm going to speak on the topic that was earlier introduced by the coordinator, the director of the program, on the issue related to food security and land in Africa. Of course, I'm going to share some issues that I have learned throughout this time, and these are issues that I got from different speakers or different women from different African countries, not only Namibia. So in the picture that is on our screen, there's certain pictures, and these pictures are some of the ways that African women use as a source of getting food, mostly for their families, that include their children mostly. So as we see in the picture, there's a picture where there are women in the field, and that is how mostly women work in the field or works in their field, which is not actually their field, but is a field of their husbands. Of which it's not a land for the women, but it's actually land for the men, and it's women who are working there to sustain their family when it comes to the food. And of course, other ways the other pictures are showing you ways of making food or cooking, and also ways of, the other one is fishing. You can see there is women they are on the river trying to fish or fishing to get fish as a way of other food that we use in Africa. We can proceed to the next slide. So after getting products or goods from the field, women use that food or this food into two different ways. One is to feed the children at home and the family at home. Two, they use it as a livelihood project, which they use it to sell a product mostly at open market. Of course, we have different ways of open market in Africa. So we have open markets where women goes to sell their product to make sure they get money. And this money is the same money that women use to pay for their children's education, to pay for their for transport, for medications, and all other needs that is needed in the house, but mostly for education purposes. Yes, we can proceed. Next slide. Apart from having goods that they get from the field, we also have some fruits that women use to make kind of traditional drinks. We call it kind of a whiskey, which is also made for the purpose of selling to make money as a way of making money. If you also look down there, there is also kettles. So kettles is also part of our farming, which is also part of our sustainability. So kettles, we use it as a source of meat, milk, and also oil. If you can also check down down in the picture of the kettle, there's also a woman down there. So they use that to get oil from the milk. So which is a way of course sustaining the house in terms of food, and also sustaining the house in terms of livelihood, where they can sell.
Yes, we can hear you. You're back.
All right, thank you. Yes, I was saying that picture was so in Namibia, there are two main towns that are known as towns that is being used for prostitutions. Or that is now Evaves Bay and one town in Oshikango. And that is a group where our church, as a church, Lutheran church, we went there to train together with the government minister of gender. We went there to train or to give information to sex workers. And it was very surprising to hearing the story of this woman background. And in fact, most of them, as we're speaking now, were assisted by the church and they were moved back to their houses. But the reason why they joined this business was nothing else than just to sustain their families. All of them, they were single mothers that just joined the work prostitutions to make money. Okay, we can go to the next slide. When it comes to, that was more on food. So when it comes to the issue of land is differ from country to country in Africa. There are countries that they are doing well when it comes to allocation of land to women. That include Namibia, South Africa, Malawi, and other countries. But there are also other countries where women are not really in a position of buying land. So, and apart, even in this country that I mentioned, that there are law that secure or authorize anyone to apply for land, that include women. There are also cultural or tribes that do not allow women to own land. Even in Namibia, there are some culture that are still into that, regardless that we have a law that says everyone can obtain a land. So like in my culture, everyone can have for example, in my culture, everyone can have a land, can buy a land. But in our society, there are words that are being used. If you can say, there's where I wrote Okawumbo and Ewumbo. So in my culture, a house which is being headed by a man is called Ewumbo, which is more of a house. But a house which is headed by a woman is called Okawumbo, which is kind of a devaluing the house. So, and there's a belief that children that grow up in the house which is headed by a woman, they are not well mannered, they are not well, they don't behave well, they tend to be thieves, they tend to be all the bad things a child can make. There's that mentality that that child have grown up in a house which was being headed by a woman. So this is just cultural beliefs that are used as a way of putting down women, of not having houses or not owning land. There are also some cultures where a husband, when a husband dies, in some cultures, the wife inherits the house. But in some cultures, the son have to inherit in the house. And if it happened that that man did not have a son, maybe they only have daughters, it means the brothers would be the one to inherit the properties and the land. So we still have that, or those type of cultures and beliefs around not only Namibia but also in any other countries, most other countries in Africa. That yes, otherwise, mostly single mothers or women who are not married, they stay in their parents' house. So we can move on to the next slide. So why these kind of things are still happening? What are the barriers along this? Of course, one barrier is issue of cultural beliefs, issue of gender inequality, an issue of child marriage still happening in Africa, that when a girl is 14 years and start menstruation, that means she's ready for marriage or she's married off. There is also issue of polygamy, where a husband or a man is married to more than one wife. So as a result, it pushes women to work hard to make sure they sustain their children, because one man cannot really sustain all the wife, maybe 3 or 4 with their children. And there are also other natural issues like droughts or floods and all others, but other mostly is the issue of hunger. A day before yesterday, there was a report in Namibia that reporting that half of 1 million population in Namibia is people living with that are suffering from poverty and hunger, and that is the highest portion is the women and the children. So some of those are the issues that really hinder the issue of women to have food or access land. We can proceed to the next slide. Yes, let's go. So I'm now looking into, let's go to the next slide. So looking into some of the issue that we can do, or some of the things that we can do as a church to overcome. So one, of course, it can be youth camps and exchange program from different counts of different cultures, different countries, different member churches, so that young people can come together, they sit and see how they can forward. We can move to the next slide, how they can overcome the challenges that we are going through. There's also now issue of educating, especially the girl child and the boy child, especially in the issue of gender equality and gender equity. We really need to, as much as we want to empower the girl child, I feel we need to empower the girl child and we need to educate the boy child, because now there's now that big imbalance that is there, because now the boy child still just stuck into the cultural beliefs and cultural norms. So it's about time also we need to educate these two children together, so that we empower the girl child and educate the boy child. We can move to the next slide. And as a church, we also need to have space for advocacy, not only having young people, not only having young people as advocates or the congregants as advocates, but it's also hard time we have our leaders be trained or be part of our advocates, be the bishops, be the pastors, be lay leaders, as long as we just need to have more voice of the church out in clear, as much as we can have both voices clear and not just having one voice clear and the other one silent. So we need more advocates on within our church leaders. Next slide. Apart from that, the church also need to start need to invest more on community or women projects or community projects. Be it at the parish or community project, or depends on different areas. But what I'm saying is we need more, let's proceed to the next slide. We need more church involvement in community activities. So here is one of the I want to use this example, which is on our screen. That is Onipa Info Hut, where I work. As it was said, it's a church project that teach computer and life skill. And it's so surprising that the young people that we have been training, they are now doing something on their own, not really employed, but they are self-employed. They are doing different projects. They are, you know, at the end, the parents will be paying for them, but at the end, the student themselves will start paying for their school fees. It's not that much, but it's a way of empowering the community and having the church voice being visible in the community in terms of food sustainability. Yes, we can proceed to the next slide. Also, when it comes to Luxa, which is a Lutheran communion in Southern Africa, every year they organize a women consultation meeting, where they call women from different member churches, lay leaders and ordained leaders. They come together, they discuss the challenges, they have plans and implement, and they go back and implement some of the activities. So these are just some of the things that as a church we really need to impact and do more, so that the church can have a voice in the community, and the community, and especially women and children, can always find the church as a safe place for them whenever they are experiencing issues of injustice, be it they lost their husbands, or be it they want to have to buy land, or be it they want to provide food for them. At least we need to have a voice that the women and the children can feel that, yes, the church is there for them and they can come to the church as a safe place. We can proceed to the next slide. In Africa, we have good policies and we have good plan written in papers. But when it comes to implementation, it's something different. So it's also a hard time that as a church, we need to have policies also within the church, because some churches, we don't even have policy when it comes to gender equality or gender justice or protection or anything. We don't really have much of policies in line. Of course, nowadays, member Lutheran churches are using the LWF gender justice policy, but we need to have policies in line as member churches. We also need to account either NGOs or government when it comes to implementation of policy. We need to do more. We need to advocate more, and we also need, because in my screen I've shared priorities. Those are now LWF priorities, but I know also even WCC have priorities. Now my point is, we need to stick to what we are saying. We need to work what we are saying. So it's not just about having policies and not just about having priorities, but we are not implementing them. So we need to implement what we are saying, and we also need to have accountabilities. So in this, by doing so, it's a way of inviting the community to come to the church at any time. Next slide.
Esther, I'm going to ask you to please move towards the final part of your presentation.
And that is the last slide. So my part to say is just to say, when it comes to the SDGs, it is number 5, it's speaking about gender equality. So it's about now, as a church and as individuals, as a communion, as ecumenical, we need to look into what are we doing, how far are we, what do we have in plan, how are we planning to implement what we have planned, how much do we put aside to when it comes to the budgeting, how much do we have for what? So we need to look into our budgeting, we need to look into our implementations and make sure we create a safe place for the woman and for a girl child. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Esther, for this valuable presentation. Thank you for asking these pertinent questions of how far are we. It's good to evaluate where we are and where we want to go. I think I also want to thank you for sharing the innovative solutions that women continue to come up with to be able to empower themselves and to use their own agency. And one example of that was the market that you shared as an example, which they use the income of which to be able to mainly pay for education and other needs. And so also thank you for highlighting the impact of cultural norms on decision-making and also on how things stay the same, even though there is an effort by government and lawmakers to move towards the equality. I think in Africa, we see this a lot in a lot of African countries. And so thank you for highlighting that. I'm going to invite our next speaker, who is Renemsongla Ozukum. Ren is an indigenous tribal woman from the northeastern part of India. She is a grassroots theologian with global exposure, engagement in ecumenical church groups, in implementing the agendas of the SDGs in the sub-Himalayan region. Ren is going to be speaking to us about the intersection between the lack of access to water and women's agency. Ren, welcome.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Before I move on to my text, I would like to acknowledge very quickly a few of my friends who are here from my region, but two of them, one who is a very young man, undergraduate, who happens to be my nephew. And recently he was recognized by the state, given an award for writing a poem on elimination of violence against women. His name is Odichung Chamir, and the other one is Tako Kichu, who is a young man also doing his doctoral research on why women are not allowed to access land and also denial of inheritance. So thank you so much. Very quickly, I would like to read out my presentation to save the time. So next slide, please. The theme of this year's World Water Day, 22nd March, which is a day after tomorrow, is leveraging water for peace. My presentation would like to highlight about gendered water in a gendered geography. No community can talk about water in a meaningful way without demonstrating its relationship to women. As child carriers, women are the carriers of the source of life. Thus, the history and identity of gendered water is intertwined with the story of women in most of the gendered geographies. The national anthem of my country, India, emulates the mighty river as symbols of unity and ecological richness. Despite having such water resources, India has her own share of gendered water narratives. The indigenous communities in my Northeast India, located in the foothills of the Himalayan region, is one of the world's biodiversity hotspots and home to numerous ethnic groups. Northeast India is also the epicenter of many independence and ethnic autonomy movements, and therefore a conflict-ridden and a heavily militarized zone. Although Northeast is a monsoon-fit region, due to climate change, rainfall and water is becoming aggressively unpredictable over the last 3 decades. The geography, migration, and civilization of indigenous communities primarily centers around your relationship to and dependence on water, land, soil, and forest. The sacredness of water in my, next slide please. The sacredness of water in my Ao Naga indigenous community is traced back to the diviner, Ongangla, the giver of mother wisdom, who advised that every community must pay utmost reverence toward proper management of creeks and springs. Even today, rivers and streams are considered as a divinely sanctioned natural boundary between clans, villages, and tribes. It is believed that water does not lie even if the rivers change their course of direction. Water has priceless, next slide please. Water has priceless social and economic value as it is free and available for every member of the village as a commonwealth. So water was never seen as a private commercial property in my community, as water is perceived as sacred sources of life and priceless. Additionally, water is a sign of ritual marker between the living and the dead. For instance, when a family member passes away, after the mournful week, the relatives and the immediate family members would go for a water ritual to the nearest river for paying respect to the departed soul, as well as to establish a final boundary between the living and the dead. The current reality of water, next slide please. The current reality of water in Northeast India is no longer under a communitarian ethos, as it is under male entitlements and often managed by patrilineal clan members, where marginalized women have no say. Women's life realities also demonstrate that there is an indispensable spiritual relationship between women, right to food, right to land and water, and right to livelihood. Lack of access and control of water affects all of these areas badly. Here, I don't need a data booklet to prove gendered water affect women adversely. As depicted in the pictures, you will find women and young girls in every nook and corner of our region going around by foot to fetch water for domestic use. During dry season, which lasts up to 6 months, women in the domestic front, including management of agroforestry, lack full access to arable land ownership and management of the community assets. This disproportionate distribution leads to major water, health, and spiritual crisis among women and children. The sacred water, which our communities once revered and considered priceless, is becoming an expensive and taxable commodity. Supplying of commercial water is seen by many people today as the most lucrative business and legitimate practice. On the other hand, the fears and struggles to control scarce resources such as water stands as one of the biggest sources of conflict within neighbors and clans, between villages and tribes, and across different states. Let us name it: water-related conflict, the struggle to buy water for domestic consumption and use, battling with waterborne diseases, sickness, poverty, scarcity, and natural resources caused by lack of water. All these realities affect women painfully, as they are expected to attend to the health, nutrition, and economy of the family. Since the last 2 decades, scientific findings indicate, next slide please. Since the last 2 decades, scientific findings indicate that the water in the Northeast India is highly contaminated by arsenic and iron. No wonder the commoners are paying a huge price on medical health care. For instance, in my region, lack of safe and clean water was one of the major causes of the recent epidemic, dengue storm. Many lives were lost, and the survivors are still struggling to recover. Therefore, safe and clean water has proven to be the best vital vaccine for dengue. In fact, safe and clean water is now equivalent to a healthy blood transfusion method. Although women-led land, water, and farmers' movements are emerging in the mainland India, women in my region are unable to equip themselves with effective capacity building and networking to lobby for similar causes. Lamenting over restoration of rights in resources, though address to God is directed toward human communities, particularly at those who own land and water resources. Despite these stark realities, I see hope for the dried up and contaminated water as groups of young people and churches, both in the grassroots and in the international level, team up to pray, commit, and sensitize the communities of water justice. I also pray that women and girls shall regain sound health as communities take back the vital vaccine of safe and clean water from private ownership for good community governance. Like the author of Lamentations, who longs for the ancient days of prosperity, the indigenous communities in my hometown or even in my region, I'm very sure that they shall put their best effort to retrieve their memories and traditions on natural abundance, where water as a source of life and healing will be restored. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ren. Thank you for emphasizing that there is a role for the church and young people to advocate for clean water, which you aptly put as, use the analogy that it is equivalent to a healthy blood transfusion. And I think that will remain in our minds. And it's incredible to learn from your context how important water is and has been, especially in context of the pandemic that you have experienced. Thank you for sharing. I will now call upon our next speaker. And our next speaker is Ledwina Cedric. Ledwina works as the Executive Director of the Ecumenical Loan Fund in India, ICLOF. So ICLOF is a small microfinancing institution registered as a not-for-profit company. It strives for economic and social empowerment for women, particularly in rural communities. Ledwina will speak to us about financial and policy services in the context of microfinancing. Welcome, Ledwina.
Thank you, Catlego, for the introduction. And I also thank Manoj for introducing me to this program. Basically, ICLOF India is a microfinance company, and we cater to the women. Many government and non-governmental organizations have adopted policies to promote the growth of microfinance institutions in India. And governments are responsible for the regulations of microfinances to rural women and their supervision as well. The church and the faith communities play a major role in recognizing the potential of the underprivileged communities and paves the way for the upliftment of the active and downtrodden women. As such, our organization, ECLOF India, are playing a major role in different countries around the globe. ECLOF is in about 16 countries around the globe, and we identify the right people and invest in their dignity. Let me give you a brief introduction about microfinance. For over 25 years, we have seen a rapid growth and expansion in the size, number of microfinance institutions in many parts of the world. Microfinance institutions are numerous and they aggregate a larger number of clients. Microfinance institutions seem to be a promising means to provide a valuable form of assistance directly to the disadvantaged sections of the society in a relatively cost-effective manner. Microfinance institutions may thus play a significant role in financial sector development and therefore an overall development of the underprivileged, especially women. The characteristics of microfinance institutions, as the term implies itself, it's micro lending to typically poor households and small enterprises in gaining access to financial service. This commitment may replace the supplement or other private objective, such as the profits and maximization of shareholder value and directions of investment. And they supplement the bank to the rural women. The services of clients of microfinance, the microfinance institutions provide a wide range of services. The best known activity of microfinance is providing credit to the poorer households and small enterprises, but they also take deposits. In addition, some microfinance offer financial services such as insurance or advice and training to the clients. Here, I would like to mention that ECLOF India has trained n number of clients to do in financial bookkeeping and savings and to start small scale industries, small scale businesses. The rural women, let me talk about the rural women and financial inclusion. Rural women are not exposed to formal banking structures. They are considered naive and therefore cannot take decisions for the family, which includes the financial decisions. Access to bank accounts is just the issue at the surface. Even the women with bank accounts use them only for receiving grants from the government or subsidies, which is very often withdrawn by the family members, the husband or other family members. Financial products like saving and investment instruments are tools that are very rarely or never been used. There is, however, one instrument that has been extensively used to try and close the gender gap with regards to financial inclusion, that is the loans for women from low-income households. One of the biggest steps taken by the government as well as other financial programs, which includes the ecumenical intervention in this regard, is to provide loans to women-led self-help groups to help them build a business and contribute to the household finances. It brings out women and learn and understand finances, makes them financially independent or confident to make their own choices. While there are generally a push towards empowering women in terms of providing them with access to bank accounts, asset ownership, rights, livelihood generation, etc., the lack of decision-making powers, illiteracy, and many other cultural factors still continue to hinder the progress towards financial independence. There are many financial products in the bank, but it is our duty to make them aware and to empower them and to make them informed of the choice when it comes to handling the finances of their households. Faith-based communities like ECLOF share our resources with these categories of clientele in the form of credit in a fair and transparent manner, which help them meet their needs of food, clothing, shelter. Faith-based MFI believes that fair credit is a means of ensuring social justice and economic well-being of these individuals and organizations. These small loans or microfinances to the non-bankable or underprivileged matters, and it makes all the difference between despair and hope, and is found to be the most effective means to serve the poor. It is this service mission that has promoted ecumenical organizations like ECLOF to have its presence in the most remote corners of several underdeveloped and developing countries, and offer microfinance at incredibly low rates in a fair and transparent manner with absolutely no hidden charges whatsoever. The ecumenical support is rendered through financial assistance in order to improve the livelihood. We have witnessed women standing in power with their husbands in financial and family decision making. This liberation is also extended to the active participation in the local panchayats or civic decisions. The tools of microfinance helps the church to rediscover its biblical mandate to serve and empower the poor through spiritual transformation as well as economic development. Every poor woman has the right to live in dignity. A Christian microfinance program is development strategy that works with the inherent capabilities of the poor and the communities instead of facilitating unhealthy dependency. Microfinance programs invest in the dignity and are valuable additions to mission programs as they can strengthen local churches. The best way to achieve a program that combines financial services and spiritual development is for local churches to partner with microfinance institutions. A church-based microfinance program needs to gain more support from church in order to succeed and thrive. Here I would like to mention that ECLOF India caters to more than 4,000 clients, and we have 4,000 success stories, in which we can see women coming out of the bondage of their families' ties, and they have started becoming independent. And there are lots of success stories I will be sharing with Kathleen and Solino through email. Though I was not able to present it here because of some technical error on my side. I will be sharing those stories with the team. So probably the team will be able to bring it out in the reports, which we will hopefully get from them. So ECLOF is also doing their best in developing the rural women. That's my story of ECLOF. And
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lidwina, for sharing with us.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it's incredible how you've said and you've highlighted the work that you do and how it contributes to the dignity of women, and how you see microfinancing as an investment tool or an investment itself in the dignity of women. So thank you for highlighting that. And thank you for highlighting how the instrument of loan that is in India that ECLOF is a part of continues to contribute to the agency or building the agency and the capacities and capabilities of women. And we also appreciate that you have mentioned that ECLOF trains clients in bookkeeping and equips them to be able to start their businesses. So that is interesting. And later on, we'd like to hear more about that, or maybe even these testimonies that you have. I'm going to go on to Solen, who is our next speaker. So Solen is a food security and nutrition expert with experience in enhancing national nutrition policies, implementing public health programs, and developing sustainable products with innovative ingredients. She is currently a consultant for the World Council of Churches, focusing on their Food for Life campaign. Solen will be speaking to us and giving us an example of women-led initiatives in Latin America. Solen, welcome.
Thank you, Katlego, for the presentation. Let me just share my screen, and there we go. So thank you very much. Today I want to talk about The context of rural women in Ecuador, where I'm currently residing, discuss geographical indications as a political instrument, a policy instrument towards sustainable rural development, and finally present an agricultural product that has women agency at its center. So, according to data from the World Bank and the UN, in 2021, 35% of Ecuadorians live in rural areas. So this represents about 6.3 million Ecuadorians, which include 3.1 million women and girls. If you're not familiar where exactly Ecuador is situated, it's on the west coast of Latin America and is one of the relatively smaller countries within the Latin American region. As is the case in many countries throughout the world, poverty rates are higher in rural areas, with almost 40% of the rural population living in poverty, compared to 23% in urban areas. Poverty, low employment rates, vulnerable or inofficial employment situations, food insecurity, as well as malnutrition, fall disproportionately on the shoulders of women. And when we look a bit more closely, impacts are higher within Indigenous and Afro-Ecuadorian communities. As is the case in many Latin American countries, there is a diverse ethnical disparities within the country, where we have indigenous populations representing around 7% of the country's population, living majoritarily in the Sierra, which is the Andean mountainous region, as well as in the Amazon region. We then have Afro-Ecuadorians, which are of African descent, which also make up 7% of the population. There is still very much a visible economic marginalization between these communities who are economically marginalized and the white Europeans, which are the most affluent ethnic group in Ecuador. So in rural areas, around a third of households are led by women. And these households on average have about 30% less income than men-led households. Moreover, we have a third of women who work in the agricultural sector. And when we look at indigenous women, this is up to more than 50%. Whereas for men, it only represents about 15% who work in agriculture. So this implies and indicates that men are seeking work in urban areas or are working in different fields in rural areas, seeking higher paid employment opportunities. So the question is, how can we bring better economic and sustainable opportunities to women, and specifically indigenous women living in rural areas? There are many policies and initiatives that intend to further sustainable rural development and improve the situation in rural areas. But what do we mean when we talk about sustainability? So first of all, we have to remember that sustainability involves three key dimensions that need to be considered, be it environmental, economic, and social. For any policy or instrument to be successful, they need to address all three dimensions in order to bring forward positive change. Today, I specifically want to talk about one policy instrument that I personally find very interesting, which are called geographical indications, also sometimes referred to as a denomination of origin, or in French as an AOC, which is an appellation d'origine contrôlée. This instrument helps to value agricultural products by promoting traditional processing methods, quality products, the know-how of farmers, as well as protecting one specific geographical location. They are now more and more also including an environmental dimension, looking at how to decrease the environmental impacts of production, as well as rethinking certain traditional processes to improve them. Created in France in the early 20th century, they are widely used to protect wine and cheese products. But they are a strong tool for rural development because they not only bring a higher economic value to the product, but also to an entire region. We can think, for example, of agrotourism within the wine region or the Alps region in France. They are not only used in Europe, and they have crossed the Atlantic and are widely used in Latin American countries to protect products such as coffee or cacao. So this brings me to talk to you about one specific product, which is called miski, and has indigenous women at its center. So what is miski? Miski is an alcoholic beverage that is made from the fermentation of a sap called sharamishki that can be extracted from the agave plant. The agave plant is a native Andean plant from the Andean region in the mountains. So for centuries, indigenous people and specifically women have extracted this sap from the agave plant for its nutritional and hydrating properties. In fact, the entire plant, from its roots to its leaves, is used within indigenous communities for clothes or other uses within the household. So the indigenous women who detain the know-how of how to extract this plant, how to extract the sap and create the product of miski have been central in formalizing what this product actually is and how we produce it. In fact, miski obtained a geographical indication in 2023 and is the only beverage in Ecuador to have this particular protection. So this means that the geographical indication protects the traditional know-how of the misqueros, which are what the farmers are called that extract this particular liquid, and creates recognition and an economic value for this product on international markets. Miski producers can now market a product that illustrates the culture and heritage of the Andean region. The denomination has just fully been authorized recently, so we are still waiting to see the long-term effects of this initiative. But there have already been several testimonies of women who have been able to increase their livelihoods thanks to the marketing of this product in international markets and notably in the United States. So we wait to see when miski will become as popular as tequila from Mexico. To conclude, we cannot deny that women living in rural areas pay the higher price and higher burden in terms of economic status, poverty rates, and food insecurity. However, we currently see a lot of positive change in women that are increasingly committed to improve their situation and from policy instruments that put sustainability as well as women's rights at their center. So thank you very much, and I'll happily discuss this topic with you further.
Thank you so much, Celine. It's incredible to learn that an indigenous plant is contributing to livelihoods in such a real way. And thank you for posing the question or prompting the question about marketing, whether it would be as famous as the tequila in Mexico. I think that's a question in terms of how we can capacitate those women to be able to market their product so widely or to a large extent. So thank you so much for sharing this great example and initiative in your context. We've come to the end of the first part of our program, and we are about to enter into the second part, which is more interactive. So we have some thoughts in the chat from some of the participants joining us, and then we also have some questions to prompt and probe the speakers who have just made some presentations a little bit more on what they have shared, and just to get to know a little bit more about what they do or what they've shared with us. So I'm going to first read a comment from Lazarus, who is just affirming some of these realities in the African context. So he says that women, mostly in African tradition, are considered legal minors who are incapable of owning and controlling land. Church, let's team up in advocating for equality. So that is Lazarus's comment. And he is following an interesting discussion in Zambia, but currently in Czech Republic. Okay. So thank you so much, Lazarus. I think these are thoughts for our speakers to also keep in mind in their interaction with each other and with us. So for Esther, I have a question that relates to the gap that exists between the cultural beliefs and norms and the cultural authority that seems to want to keep things the same or perpetuate this inequality and this disempowerment of women. And on the other side, national laws that aim to move towards this equality that we envision, that we aspire for. So maybe the question more directly is, how can the church address these patriarchal figures in their communities? What do you believe the role of the church is in terms of closing the gap that exists between these two powerful and influential entities, culture and national government or lawmakers? You can think about it, and then for Ren, I think you highlighted the role of water, how important it is, particularly in your context. And the analogy that you used was a blood transfusion, a healthy blood transfusion. So I think the question is, do you have any examples of any initiatives that the church in your community, in your local context, is doing or is a part of to be able to advocate actively on these things? So can you give us one or two examples of what the church is doing in terms of making sure that everybody has access to this water that is literally life in your context? And then to Lidwina, you've taught us a lot about loan as an instrument and loan as possible investment in and of itself. So not just contributing to investments. And the question there would be about how ICLOF deals with the issue of collateral, especially when we know that women do not always have ownership of things, of assets that they can offer as collateral. So how do you deal with collateral or loan guarantees in the type of loan schemes or loan agreements that you do have with the women, the households, and the businesses that you do support and invest in? And then for Celine, so your question, I think you prompted it. So I think if you are imagining any ways in which this agave plant could be marketed more widely, and maybe an example of marketing that could be used as opposed for other indigenous plants, maybe you can share that with us. So as we engage, those are the questions and comments and themes that I'd like you to touch on. So Esther, would you like to go first?
Of course, and thank you for the very challenging and interesting question.
Yes.
Well, it's very true that there is a big gap, and of course we have some good law and policies in some different countries that are really there protecting women and really providing space for the women. Although culture has now taken over that space. So how the church can come in, the church can do a lot actually. And some of the response, I think I already shared them. Firstly, the church need to educate. And believe me, society or the community listen to the church more than any other space. So when the church speak, everybody tend to listen. So I believe that if the church starts to educate their congregations or congregates or parishioners in issues are related to policies and all that, it can help. And of course, I also speaking about church leaders being advocates. We can also be the advocates as a church leaders, be it pastors, be it lay leaders. In our church, we also have youth league, Sunday school, women league, men league. We can also use those platforms as a way of discussing and empowering and addressing these issues, rather than just sitting down and doing and just discussing few other things and looking down and not looking down into issues of land and food sustainability. So we can have it as part of our annual discussions. And mostly in most of the member churches, we have these annual youth conferences, be it youth conference, Sunday school, men, other conferences. So we can also have government speakers or advocates that are coming in just for that conference, just been a 5 minutes a platform for an advocate who is advocating for land or food sustainability to just come in and say something to the whole group of people that are attending the conference. To 5-6 people pick up something that also have an impact in the community or the society. So I believe it's more on educating, advocacy, awareness, and yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. So what we're hearing is that you believe that churches can use the existing platforms, so modalities or groups or youth groups, for example, as channels of advocacy and as vehicles to lobby, for example, cultural leaders who seem to be lagging behind, and educate them on and advocate for example, for the land rights as they relate to women's agencies. I think that is what we are learning from your response.
Yes, thank you. And if I remember, even in 2020, during the 16 days of activism in my country, we had, of course, support from LWF, but one of the main activity that we did, we had, I think, a 2-day training of traditional leaders, and it was really amazed because, and it really made me know, not only know, but realize that in many cases, when it comes to traditional or culture taking over, it's not really to say traditional leaders don't want, but it's really issue of lack of knowledge or lack of information. So it was really an open mind that they were willing to learn, and they were really asking more questions, and at the point that I even have to invite another person from another ministry to come in, and because they keep asking things within that line, which I also didn't have. So it's really just a matter of educating and giving information and creating platform for all this, everyone who is involved in the society's ground level.
Okay, thank you so much. Lidwina or Ren. Lidwina, you're on mute. Your microphone is muted.
Maybe I go?
Yes.
Yes.
Katlego? I hear what Sister Esther was talking about the church. What the church is doing or what the church is saying matters a lot in the community. And I strongly believe that the church will take heed of what we are doing or what we're discussing, even in this small space right here. Because 2 years ago, dengue was there in our region because it's a hotspot of monsoon and highly populated area. But it was the first phase that the dengue was more scary disease, and doctors were unable to say what kind of medicine would alleviate us. Only thing that they could suggest was have as much as papaya leaves. But during the second phase last year, during the fall, just after Christmas, majority of our people, almost all the families were hospitalized, and we were searching blood. But then the best method that we could learn, as much as we talk about food as the best vaccine, water is also equivalent as the best vaccine, even much more than a blood transfusion, which is very expensive. But to have safe drinking water, safe, clean drinking water is one of the best. And why we cannot afford it? Too many agencies outside or inside is involved. And I am very sure that the church, although we are still in a charitable approach way, instead of rights-based approach or advocacy level, I'm very sure the church will do, because the church has been compassionate and the church has reached out to many as much as possible in our own local areas to help the families who were affected or even those who have died. So that's how the process is on. Yeah. But I can say that water is the best vaccine as of now for dengue.
Thank you, Ren. That is very encouraging. Lidwina?
Yes, we are a microfinance company, and basically any microfinance institution, we cater to the rural and the downtrodden, which means the downtrodden and the rural, they don't have anything to give as a collateral. That is the reason we are able to serve them. They are not able to go to the banks. They're not bankable. And the banks cannot accept their loan applications because they don't have something as collateral to give offered to the banks for the loans. That is where we enter. That is where we have a footing there. So we can cater to the downtrodden without a collateral, without a guarantee. So the guarantee for us is it's the peer pressure. Like we give it to groups, self-help groups or joint liability groups, as we call them. So we give them loans in groups, which means the group takes the responsibility of each one else. If there are 15 members in the group, 15 members are responsible for repaying each one's loan. So it's a peer pressure which motivates them to repay the loans. Moreover, it's the rapport that we build with the clients. It is not the collateral which we depend on, it's the rapport which we build with the clients, and that motivates them to repay to us. And one more reason is we ensure that the loans given to them are utilized for a purpose of livelihood, which means they make a living, they earn, and they're able to repay to us. So that's how we are able to get 100% repayment from the loans which we disperse to them. And being rural women, they are very responsible and hardworking. They take the responsibility to repay, and they also want to live in dignity. So they don't like us going and repeatedly asking them to repay. That's something which women don't like, to going to the doorstep and asking them, please repay. So they do it on their own. That's the culture we teach them.
Sure. Yes. Thank you so much. That is really encouraging. Rapport, peer pressure, and livelihoods. That's what gets you your 100% loan paybacks. Yes. Okay, so Len.
Thank you for your question, Kat Lego. So should Mishke become the next tequila? Maybe not. Let's just talk about the differences quickly. So the agave plant is native to the whole Andean region from and across to the United States as well, from the south of the United States right down to the south of Chile. And so there are many different types of agave plants. In Mexico, they have mass production of agave, obviously to be able to respond to the demand for tequila in the world market. In Ecuador, they're trying to do something a little bit different. So they have a different species of agave plant that takes between 10 to 15 years to actually mature before you can extract the liquid. So it's a very long-term process. And they're also sort of promoting the use of small producers that can actually give back the economic value to the community, which is not always the case when you look at sort of mass production of a certain product. So I think in terms of marketing, it is very important to have the economic value in mind, especially if you are marketing to international markets, without maybe trying to aim to be the most renowned product that is available. In terms of other species, Ecuador has a huge diversity, for example, of maize. Corn, or referred to as corn as well, is one of the most eaten crops on the planet, but we only eat one type. Whereas in Ecuador, there are maybe hundreds of different varieties of maize plants that could be actually exploited. Well, they're not for the time being. And this could also create a livelihood for indigenous people who are the main farmers who are farming these types of maize plants and don't actually reap enough economic value from their work.
Thank you, Celine. So thank you to all our panelists for being so generous in the engagement. I'm going to ask Rebecca to please get ready to share with us on the advocacy and call to action. So Rebecca is an advocacy assistant with the World Council of Churches at the Ecumenical Office to the United Nations, with specific interest in gender justice and sustainable development. She has academic qualifications in health science. So Rebecca.
Hi, thank you so much, first of all, for the opportunity to speak on this panel. It's definitely a privilege to be with you all today, whatever time it is for you. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about why and how we should be advocating for some of these issues that have been raised with us today. And so firstly, I'd like to just strip it back and take it to some of our kind of core theologies around Christianity. And so there are many references to food and agriculture in the Bible. Right from the very first chapter in Genesis, we hear about our creation. And then we also come into the New Testament with the Last Supper, and there's stories of wedding banquets and parables. And so really food and agriculture is kind of at the core of a lot of our biblical teachings. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of when Jesus fed the 5,000 and the miracle of 5 loaves and 2 fish becoming enough to feed thousands of people. And I recently heard a new interpretation of that story where the food was multiplied because people learned how to share and people were gracious with what they had. And that lesson kind of inspired the crowds to kind of be open to sharing and not keep things for themselves. And I think that's something that we as the faith-based community can really use in our gifts and in the work that we do, and kind of really take that on board and learn to share what we have and really kind of give back to the people in our communities who don't have enough. And there's the issue around women, and we're here right now at CSW, and we're advocating for gender justice and specifically women's rights. And I think women also play a very key role in the Bible as well. Historically, women are often seen as kind of the second best to men, and often are kind of treated as more like servants and submissives. But I think actually there's many times in the Bible where women are really uplifted and really valued. One example comes to mind is Mary Magdalene was the first witness of Jesus' resurrection. And I think that we can really learn from Jesus in that way, that he really valued women. And I think that's something that we can really carry with us in our advocacy work. So I guess you could argue that it's not only a moral sense that we should care about those and care about these issues of food security and justice for women in this agricultural industry, but also that as Christians, this is something that we're called to do from the Bible. And then moving more to a kind of legal, more sort of United Nations focus, as this is where some of my experience has come from in this office. The UN has a special rapporteur on the right to food, and they are mandated to promote access to food for all and allow everybody to fully enjoy the right to food. And their mandate does also specifically address those who are disproportionately affected by food security, which does include women and Indigenous people. So there's kind of both sides to that there, the kind of our theological and also legal. And if we look at the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 2, which is after addressing poverty, goal number 2 is to end hunger and achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. So really, it's a top priority for the United Nations and therefore the international community to keep these issues right at the forefront of our advocacy work. We've heard from these examples today, and many of us are aware that women are responsible for the majority of agricultural work in rural areas. But often, as we've heard, they don't own the land that they work on for the majority of the time, and often don't receive economic justice for the work that they do, due to unjust taxation, unfair wages, if they're even paid at all. And they often lack access to agricultural education and struggle receiving business loans, which really just make things significantly more difficult for women in the agricultural and food production industry. Women are also, in many cultures across the world, second to eat after males. So not only are they responsible for a lot of the physical work around food production, a lot of the time they're also second to eat after, which can lead to issues of malnutrition and significant injustice. And women are disproportionately affected. And it's expected that by 2030, 342 million people will be living in extreme poverty with issues of food security, with the majority of those people being women, which is actually, when you think about it, a huge issue. And 70% of people who are food insecure are living in conflict zones. And the climate crisis is also having a significant impact on food production and on women. And so really, these issues are so intersectional, and we need to really be, when we come in with our advocacy work, dealing with it as a whole picture rather than kind of focusing on individual issues, because everything is so interconnected. We must also consider the impact of investing in education, educating our women on business skills and financial independence, and also skills around agriculture, to really equip women with the skills that they need in order to succeed, and hopefully to increase their prospects and economic justice. So where can we go for our advocacy work? So in terms of starting at a local level, within our churches, within our own congregations, we can be promoting, raising awareness about these issues around food security, even if we are from a nation where different issues affect different nations. And so educating about what's going on at a local level, a national level, and a global level can really help raise awareness with people in our community of what is going on. We can go to our local governments, our national governments, and advocate for change in policy, and ensure that our governments are ensuring that this is a priority, not only nationally, but for international engagement as well. And then when we come to the international community, the United Nations is a space where we can and should be advocating. For example, CSW, we're here right now, we're having this conversation, we're bringing these issues around food and agriculture into the conversation about gender-based justice. And that's something that we should be grateful for this space for and continue to do as we leave this CSW space. But there are also other ways in the UN that we can bring this conversation to the forefront of member states and governments' minds. For example, the Economic and Social Council is mandated to address the issues around food security. The General Assembly's Second Committee also shares this mandate. But then also we have some civil society platforms, which as faith-based organizations and actors, we have a role within this civil society space. So for example, the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism is part of the Committee on World Food Security, which is the largest international space for civil society organizations involved in food security. And again, this really brings into the whole intersectional approach to our advocacy, because everything is so interconnected with our gender justice, Indigenous people justice, food justice, agricultural justice. And these are spaces in which we can use our voice in this space. So how do we do it? We know we have a better idea of where we can go. How can we do it? As Christians and as churches and faith-based organizations, we have the benefit of being connected to grassroots and community level. We're really embedded within communities, which often means that we have a good understanding of what is going on and what our people are dealing with and what the situation is on the ground. This is quite a unique position and therefore gives us, we're well positioned for national and international advocacy, because we can bring our information and expertise and knowledge of what's going on in our communities to our governments and policymakers. But sometimes faith-based organizations can be overlooked in international spaces, particularly by national governments. So a way to overcome this is to collaborate and to work in an interfaith setting. The United Nations is very keen to promote working in a multi-faith and interfaith space. And so is there a way for us to collaborate? Can we work with our colleagues and neighbors? Can we collaborate on our shared goals and really do justice for our people? Another thing to consider when we are advocating is data collection. It's really important that we know what we're trying to push for and where we're trying to come from, where we've been, where we are, and where we're hoping to go. And a really effective way to do that is by bringing together data. What are the numbers? What are we looking at? What's the impact of what we have already seen? Because a lot of the time we see positive things that are happening by local organizations and churches, but sometimes we need some more resources. And so if we can really prove the positive impact that we've had, that could hopefully help us in better stance when we're looking to do that. The World Council of Churches, as I'm sure many of you are aware, has the Food for Life campaign, which promotes just and sustainable food systems and adequate nutrition for all, with specific focus on human rights, because these are issues of human rights. And so there are many resources through the World Council of Churches which can help you as a church or as a local community kind of really focus in your advocacy, with a lot of issues focusing around justice, around food. So there are the 10 Commandments of food, which really look at not only the consumption of food, but also the production and ensuring that it's sustainable and just for the people who are preparing our food and those who are consuming food as well. There's also the Church's Week of Action on Food, which is a week specifically dedicated to praying and reflecting and looking at scripture around food production and food security across the world. So this is something that you can also use at a local level to really amplify these issues in your own communities and try and really focus yourself on these issues as a community. So I think my take-home message would really be, let's not be afraid to work together. As an ecumenical community, we represent nearly 600 million Christians across the world, and that's a big number of people. There are only 2 states in the world that have larger populations than that. So really, if we unite together with one voice, even within the ecumenical community, we have a lot of people that we're speaking on behalf of. And that doesn't include if we collaborate in a more interfaith setting also. If we speak together, we stand definitely stronger at being heard, particularly in international spaces. So that would be my encouragement to you, is that let's work together on this. Let's not be afraid to collaborate and really kind of center in our goals. I think it's so often we like to focus on what makes us different and what we don't agree on, or what kind of separates us. But I think if we change our narrative and change our focus and think about what unites us and really kind of work together on our collective priorities, then really I think we could make a difference. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, at different levels, and for highlighting and emphasizing the importance of collaboration. Before I ask Dr. Manoj to give us some concluding remarks and end off the session with a prayer, I'd just like to thank each of the speakers for sharing generously from their contexts, from their different areas of expertise. And thank you for engaging with all of us. Thank you to all the participants who have joined online and have contributed to this discussion. Thank you that we have learned together. And so with that, I would like Dr. Manoj to please come on and conclude the session for us, also with a prayer.
Thank you very much, Catligo, for your excellent moderation, and also it's a wonderful occasion, to a very rich session of this parallel UN CSW parallel event, overcoming barriers for women and women to food, water, and land and livelihoods, and these wonderful resource persons, Esther, Ren, Lidwina, and Sulain, and Rebecca. They have brought it from all over the world, this phenomenal examples. So and it points us to that we need transformation at all levels, at our family level, at the community and the church level, national and international level. But today, just earlier today, I was discussing with our program director, Reverend Dr. Kenneth Matata, and he was highlighting some things that ultimately we have to move towards a stage where our communities and churches are faithful, sustainable, and effective and efficient. And I really, from this session, I gathered much of that very effectively. So let me just summarize these points which I heard. First of all, it points us to our churches and communities becoming faithful by leading by example, especially in making sure that we break down the barriers, leading by example. And we heard examples, practical steps, educating, equipping, advocating, and so that we are accountable to God and people, so that churches are people will look up to churches and say, here is a good example. And then when we talk about sustainability, we heard examples of how communities are reclaiming their indigenous knowledge, community ownership, the sacredness of traditions, and of positive points of tapping into the agency of our communities. Only that leads us to sustainability. And then finally, for us to be effective and efficient, we need systems transformation. And these sessions have pointed that we need systems transformation. We need to challenge the domination and mammon. We need to break down injustices, break down barriers to make sure that women and girls have a level playing field. We know it was shown that we need tools, and it is possible. We need financial instruments, and we need accompaniment in the churches and communities to accompany women in this journey. So this session was very fruitful. It showed us many good examples, and really points us that we can overcome these things, but we have to be faithful. We have to aim towards sustainability and effectiveness. Thank you so much, and for this wonderful session. So let's give a moment of reflection and prayer. Loving Lord, thank you, Lord, for this time. Thank you, Lord, for the lives of our resource persons, for the young resource, for the youth and the women of our society, who are our mothers, our sisters, our daughters. They show the way. And thank you for this inspiring session. Help us as churches and communities to be faithful, to aim for sustainability, to aim for systems transformation, so that we will become effective instruments to transform this world. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, and thank you all for joining. And that brings us to the end of our session today.